I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We are having Susan White here to do a author reading from her book, Such a Winter's Day. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land upon which we have gathered is unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Epiquik, Prince Edward Island, which is where I am based, is covered by the historic treaties of peace and friendship. We pay our respects to the indigenous Mi'kmaq people who have occupied this island for over 12,000 years, past, present, and future. Susan, take it away.
Okay, thank you. I would like to begin tonight by thanking the Writers Union of Canada for providing the funding for this national public reading. I would also like to thank Terry Lee Bulger and Acorn Press for publishing Such a Winter's Day, which is my 14th novel. I have so appreciated Terry Lee's support since the publication of my first book, The Year Mrs. Montague Cried, in 2011. And I especially want to thank Tracy Belcher for organizing and hosting this event. She works tirelessly for Acorn's authors and goes above and beyond to support them in every aspect of their publishing journeys. Tracy fits this all in while embarking on her exciting new enterprise, Sassy Lassie Vintage, in Albany, PEI, as well as being a published author herself. In July 2021, due to some personal circumstances, I found myself living a block away from King Square in St. John, New Brunswick. I am just going to mention and hold up the cover of my book. The cover is a photograph taken by a photographer from Mississauga, Ontario, named Ian Mutto. And when I was looking for a cover for this book, I stumbled upon this photograph, and it was just perfect for the story that I had crafted. And Tracy and my publisher, Terry Lee, but Tracy, I think, contacted Ian and asked if they could purchase the photograph. I think he sold it at a very reasonable price and asked only for a signed copy of the book, which when my book was released in October 2024, I was happy to send him a signed copy. So that's about King Square. And of course, that's the bandstand in King Square. And just the readings that I chose tonight, I think you'll realize why that is such a fitting cover. And I see Ida has joined us, and Lynette, I thank you for joining us. Okay. The day I moved into my Princess Street apartment, I drove by King Square and looking in at the bandstand, imagined a man lying on one of the benches. It was in that moment the seed was dropped for Such a Winter's Day. I was finishing up another novel, but by September, I had begun telling the story of Hank Lowman. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the man that I dedicated this book to, Peter Evan MacArthur. Evan died in St. John on January 7th, 2024, after being severely burned in a homeless encampment fire while rescuing occupants from the burning tent and looking for another person he believed to still be inside. A few weeks ago, I had the privilege of meeting Evan's mother, Heather, and gifting her a copy of Such a Winter's Day. In my selected readings tonight, and I kind of wish I could just put a bag over my head because anyway, whatever, you know how vain we are when we have to look at ourselves. Thank you. In my selected readings tonight, I would like to give you a glimpse of Hank, but also introduce you to the people who along the way took the time to really see this unhoused old man. So I'm going to do my readings, and then and after I wrap it up, if there's any questions, we'll take time for any questions or comments. Okay, so I'm going to start by reading just the first two pages, and it is set in November 2nd, 2021. So the story goes from November 2021 to January 2021. So 2 months in the life of this man, but it goes back and forth and also tells his backstory, but I'll get whatever. Okay, November 2nd, 2021. Hank walked slowly through King Square. The mid-morning sun was bright, but the wind biting. The trees surrounding the bandstand were bare, the ground carpeted with the colorful foliage that had graced the square into late October. City workers had turned off the fountain, cleaned up the gardens, and removed the hanging baskets in preparation for winter. Fewer people were milling about, but the clusters of pigeons remained. A few were pecking wildly at a Tim Hortons paper bag. Hank felt for the gift card in the pocket of his parka. Someone had handed it to him several days ago as he stood on the corner in front of the CIBC bank, but he hadn't tried to use it yet. He hated the way heads turned toward him when he walked in the door. Even when he hadn't been technically homeless, it was as if he wore a sign announcing his worthlessness when he entered Tim's. He'd always had enough change to pay for whatever he ordered, but the doubt and distrust were written on the servers' faces. Sometimes the person behind the counter looked too young to be employed, and sometimes too old to still be working at a job barely paying minimum wage. Hank tried not to judge either way, but Hank felt judged by everyone around him. Strangely, this came from a feeling of not being seen by those who passed him, while at the same time feeling each stare or passing glance as a condemnation. The woman he'd helped up off the sidewalk a few minutes ago used the word invisible. Others walked by, giving the collapsed woman a wide berth, chalking up her stumble off the curb and her bleeding face to a drunken state, and not one they wished to engage with. Apparently, I'm invisible, the woman muttered as Hank helped her to her feet. I'm Pearl. Hank reached into his pocket for an unused folded napkin and handed it to Pearl. I'm Hank. Your face is bleeding. Are you okay? They think I'm drunk. I'm not drunk, Pearl said, dabbing at her forehead. These people walk by me every day, and they don't even see me. Not a nod, or God forbid a kind word. I watch them scurry along, living their busy, important lives. Not one would have a clue where I live or anything about me. I'm just some scary old lady to them. That's if they even notice me. And I guess falling on these uneven, poorly maintained sidewalks makes ignoring me even easier. We're all drunks or drug addicts, as far as they're concerned. Hank sensed the anger in Pearl's words and recognized the underlying hurt. A few days ago, he'd stood on the sidewalk watching workers haul out the furniture, fixtures, appliances, and discarded possessions from the rooming house on Duke Street. Everything was thrown in the dumpster as the pompous real estate agent stood smiling for the camera while handing the keys to the new owner. So the first character, or the first person that really saw Hank and paid attention to Hank was Pearl. And I'm going to read two readings about Pearl to give you an idea of Pearl's circumstances and a bit maybe of her background, and just to introduce you to Pearl. Let me see, where is Pearl? The first reading. November 7th, 2021. Pearl stepped back as if trying to get away from her own shrill voice and angry words. When she found herself having one of these tirades, all she heard was her mother's voice. Sometimes she'd be mid-sentence and have no idea what she was even angry about. But backing down seemed impossible right now, unless she just walked away and went into her building. She's crazy. Pearl watched two women quickly cross the street rather than walk into the middle of the altercation. The apple didn't fall from the tree, her father always said, and if that was the case, maybe she was crazy. And if you think you can, this is just bullshit. Pearl pulled her fleece jacket tighter and fumbled with the zipper. Maybe it was the bite in the air putting her in such a foul mood, causing her to pick a fight with this man. Spending lots of time outside was how she'd gotten through the last several months, but it was getting harder now that the air was colder and a November snow turning to rain had covered the sidewalks with ice. Seasonal affective disorder, the shrink called it. Christ, that's all I need, had been her reply, as if 40 years in an alcoholic stupor hadn't been enough. Her sobriety had been hard won, and she hadn't taken a drink in 7 years. Looking in the mirror every morning, she marveled at the improvement recovery had brought. But she knew that to others, she was the black-haired, balding, creepy old woman who walked the city streets all hours of the day as if she were a ghost looking for her rightful home. Crazy and probably drunk was how she figured most folks saw her, even if they'd never heard her lose her shit at random strangers. The man she'd taken a strip off a few minutes ago had just driven away, leaving her to decide if she'd keep walking or retreat inside to calm down. People seldom spoke or made eye contact, which was probably for the best. But why would strangers be any different than her own children? Unpredictable, David always said. A nut bar was Kenny's description. A basket case, Ruth called her. She never tried to convince them otherwise, even after she stopped drinking. She'd fired the same judgment at her own mother and completely understood the embarrassment her children felt. They had their own lives to live, and she would carry on living hers as best she could. At least she could still afford her small apartment, and she didn't need much. Surprising how few groceries one frail old woman needs. Whatever she had was a hell of a lot better than ending up where her poor old mother had. Not that Centricare was there anymore. Pearl had walked all the way to the west side one day to sit in the grassy area where the old brick buildings had stood. Sitting on the bench, the mist and stench of the roiling falls in her nostrils, she'd sobbed for her dead mother. Maybe someday her own children would do the same, wherever they decided her shrine should be. Okay, the second reading to introduce Pearl. December 7th, 2021. Pearl sat down on the bench beside Hank. From a large blue and white striped bag, she pulled out a thermos, 2 coffee mugs, and a bag of Mrs. Dunster's donuts. We'll have a feast. The wind's died down a bit, and the sky looks brighter. Thanks a lot, Pearl. I appreciate this little picnic. Nothing like hands around a hot mug of coffee. Paper cups just aren't the same. Pearl poured the coffee into the 2 big mugs and handed one to Hank. She took a swig from hers before speaking. I need to tell you something, Hank. What? Did you win the lottery or something? No, I didn't win the lottery. But wouldn't that be something if I did? First thing I'd do is buy a big fancy place we could both live in. It's about that. I feel guilty every time I leave you and walk to my apartment. What do you mean? Hank said, reaching for a donut. What do you have to feel guilty about? I have a roof over my head, running hot and cold water, heat, a stove to cook on, and a refrigerator to keep food in. I have all the comforts of home, nothing fancy, but a safe and comfortable place to lay my head every night. And I'm glad you do, Hank said, turning toward Pearl. I don't begrudge anyone that can say the same. I hope I don't act like I do. No, that's the thing. You never seem angry about how unfair it is that someone like me has a place I can afford to live in, and you don't. But I feel angry at myself. I have a comfortable couch, and if I was any kind of a friend, I'd invite you to sleep on it, especially with winter coming on. Pearl, don't be ridiculous. You certainly don't need to feel guilty for my present housing situation. I want to tell you why I can't offer you a place to stay until your situation gets better. You do not owe me an explanation, Hank said firmly. You don't owe me anything. Pearl poured more coffee into both cups before continuing. I have not had an easy life, Hank. I made some bad choices and I burned a lot of bridges. But some of what happened to me was not my fault. I've had some very bad men in my life. I'm sorry to hear that, Pearl. My father used to beat me. He beat us all. You'd think that would teach a girl to stay away from violent men, but I married one every bit as angry and cruel as my father. I had kids with him, even when I knew he'd be as terrible a father as my own. I just drank myself into a daze and ignored it. My escape from him came when he died in a barroom brawl, but I didn't get myself straightened out. Instead, I fell for a charmer I met one day in Queen Square, and I believed every word the silver-tongued devil told me. Just weeks after meeting him, I invited him to move in, and the terror he inflicted made my dad and my husband seem like saints. Pearl pulled a Kleenex out of her coat pocket and dabbed her eyes before continuing. I don't trust anybody. I got myself sober, but I carry a lot of baggage. My own kids don't even talk to me, and I have never met my grandchildren. I am a lonely, scared old woman, and my little apartment with its deadbolt locks is the only place I feel safe. Hank shifted his mug to his other hand and draped his free arm around Pearl's shoulder. I am so sorry to hear that you've been through all that, Pearl. Believe me, I know what it's like to feel unsafe and afraid. The violence I've been afraid of comes from hatred and intolerance. I'm an old man now, and I don't give off any gay vibes, but believe me, I know what terror can come just from walking down the street. And sometimes, it's fitting, violence bursts right through doors, finds and attacks victims just for being a certain way and in a certain place. He set his coffee cup down on the ground and reached to embrace Pearl in a hug. You have every right to take care of yourself first, and I'm glad you feel safe in your apartment. I think you're a courageous, amazing woman. Pearl returned the hug awkwardly, then repositioned herself on the bench. I just didn't want you to think I don't care. I never thought that for a minute, Pearl. Would someone who didn't care make such good coffee and bring a man a whole bag of donuts? I'll take another one of those. And that's a little bit of getting to know Pearl. The next character that really saw Hank and was so kind and caring was Gloria. Okay, I'll introduce you to Gloria. Let's see. All right. Gloria, or November 3rd, 2021. Gloria Hamilton stood back to see if the pegboard was straight. Pretty hard for the paintings to hang straight if the hooks weren't level. Ted always told her she had a crooked eye and never let her hang anything on the walls in the house. You'd have the walls pockmarked with nail holes if I didn't stop you. Just because our son is a crack filler doesn't mean you can punch holes willy-nilly. A pegboard display wall in her studio had been Ted's idea. The lockdown and COVID restrictions had made street traffic non-existent, and if she was being realistic, crowds were never going to beat down her door to buy paintings. But the studio space on Germain Street had never been retail motivated anyway. 7 years ago, when she'd rented this small space, she had just given up her apartment on Princess Street after living a year separated from Ted. A grown woman running away from home had caused quite a disruption in the family and a buzz through her small community. But in a sudden flash, she had chosen to face a problem she'd been ignoring. It was a decision Gloria didn't regret, as it brought healing and recovery to both her and Ted, and their marriage ended up stronger for it. Ready to go back home and not wanting to leave the freedom and novelty of living uptown, she compromised by renting a studio space with a small kitchen attached so she could indulge herself in what she'd come to enjoy about living alone in the city and having a quiet place to create. Gloria was now coming into St. John to paint 4 days a week, which to some would seem an extravagance, but to her was well worth the rent. Painting had become a second career after 30 years of teaching, and the time spent in the city a novelty after 40 years of country living. In the city, she felt the way she'd felt when she was 18 years old in her first apartment on Duke Street. 68 is the new what? Gloria chuckled to herself as she climbed up the step stool to hang a print on the hooks at the top of the pegboard. Okay, in the second reading, introducing Gloria, page 107. Is a little bit longer, but I'm going to read it anyway, and it's a little bit difficult for me to read, but I'm going to do it anyway. November 25th, 2021. Gloria flipped the sign on the door to open, pulled up the blinds, filled the kettle, and turned the radio on to catch the CBC 8 o'clock news. 2 young brothers dead in a single vehicle crash. The words hit her in the gut. The announcer spoke the headline in a monotone voice, holding no trace of the misery that accompanied the actual event. Someone had just been told their 2 sons were dead. Today, a family was facing an unimaginable loss that would forever be a marker between before and after. Gloria went to the door and flipped the open sign to closed. She slumped to the couch as her mind took her back to the nightmare of those first hours. Of course, right away, they had had to go through all the rituals a death requires: funeral arrangements, choosing a casket, dictating an obituary. Gloria recalled grabbing notepaper to jot down a hurried list of Zach's friends for pallbearers. Newscasts don't tell of that misery, or the torture of waiting for your youngest son to wake up so you can rush to him before he hears the commotion downstairs or quietly stumbles into the chaotic frenzy of what? They'd driven back home to several cars already in the yard that morning, and there'd been a steady stream of people in and out all day. Food started arriving and kept coming for a full month afterwards. What generosity is shown at first? The families affected by today's news clip would no doubt receive that too. It's in the months and years after a loss that grief becomes a more solitary journey. Life goes on, but yours is never the same. At first, she had sobbed almost hourly, then daily, and then somehow, as time passed, less often, as the pain somehow became more manageable. But sometimes the floodgates opened and returned in a deluge. When the sobbing came, it felt the same as it did in those first days, the panic just as intense. Gloria lowered her head and gave into it. The sound of loud knocking on the window pane behind her stopped the sobbing short, and Gloria turned her head to look out. The hood of the parka was tied tight around the man's face, but she recognized Hank, his blue eyes showing through heavy eyebrows, his whiskers frosty and white. His knocking continued as he brought his face closer to the glass. Gloria stood and walked into the hall, unlocked and opened the door, motioning for Hank to come in. Lock the door behind you, would you please? I'm not open for business. I can see that, Hank said. He gently led Gloria back into her studio, his eyes filled with tears as his voice faltered. Are you all right? Right as rain, peachy keen, just fine. Gloria sat back down on the couch, grabbed a Kleenex, and dabbed at her sodden cheeks. That's what fine looks like, is it? Hank said. Mind if I put the kettle on? Looks like you could use a cuppa. Always the cure. Absolutely. I've got some biscuits out there too. Tea and crumpets, just the ticket. Gloria lowered her head into her hands, feeling the exhaustion that intense emotion brings. Hearing Hank in the kitchen, she felt the comfort of his presence. Hank returned to the studio a few minutes later with 2 steaming cups of tea and a plate of buttered and jammed biscuits. The only thing missing is the clotted cream, Hank said, setting the tray down. He pulled up a chair and sat across from Gloria. Have a couple of sips, then tell me what's put you in a funk this morning. A funk. Now that's a damn fine word for it. I expected to see you at the easel when I walked by, Hank said. Thought maybe your closed sign was on account of a deadline or something, or maybe too absorbed in your art to open up. Glad I bothered looking in. Gloria steadied her teacup in her hands. Thanks, Hank. Do you want to talk about it? I'm no stranger to crying, Gloria said slowly, almost dismissively, not sure she was up to sharing more than that. She took a sip of tea and reached for another tissue, dabbing at the tears on her cheeks. It's always right there, you know, she continued. It's no shock when it boils up and tears come. More shocking to me is how I can go so long without crying. It can be a hard slog, Hank said, passing Gloria the plate of biscuits. Grief is a brutal companion by times, but it's the price we pay to love. Gloria took a small bite of the biscuit, unsure she could chew and swallow. She processed Hank's words and raised her head to look more closely at his face, those blue eyes still the focal point. In those eyes, she saw compassion, understanding, and a familiar sadness. What's the loss you carry, Hank? How do you know I've lost someone? I see it in your eyes. Plus, you don't get to be our age without loss. Your parents are both dead, I assume. Yeah, but I lost them long before they passed away. Hank stood up, teacup in hand, and moved toward the window. Not sure I ever had them, truth be told. They never knew me, that's for damn sure. I left St. John when I was 19, and I think they decided then I was dead as far as they were concerned. As a mother, I doubt that, Hank. Hank cleared his throat and walked back into the kitchen. Okay, the next character that came to really know and appreciate Hank was Liam. And I'm going to read 2 readings to introduce you to Liam. November 3rd, 2021. Liam Matthews passed a hard copy of his resume to the managing director sitting across the desk from him. He'd considered emailing it to Scott Mercer, but decided at the last minute to take a chance and drive in. Masking in public places was now mandatory, but at least the lockdown was over. When he and Amanda had filled the U-Haul and headed east, they'd had no idea what was ahead. In February 2020, nobody did, even though the daily news coming from places like Italy and China was alarming. At least they'd gotten to New Brunswick before traveling from province to province became complicated. Throwing a pregnancy into the move made it even more challenging. Being near family was the main reason for moving back, and the support they'd received since the baby's birth validated that decision. But lately, Liam had begun to wonder if, in moving home, he'd sacrificed the career he had worked so hard to establish. A job at the Imperial would quiet some of the angst he felt about that, even if what they were offering right now was just part-time. As a kid, Liam had been completely enthralled with the Imperial Theater. He remembered sitting in the balcony listening to Murray McLachlan in 1995. The lights and sound brought the theater alive, and Liam had felt the thrill of that to his core. Tears ran down his cheeks at one point during that concert, but he'd quickly swiped them away, not wanting his dad, an older brother, to see how emotional the night was for him. Liam's father had parked a few blocks away, and walking into King Square had been another highlight of the night. The X-shaped walkways of the square led to the elaborate bandstand, twinkling with what seemed like thousands of lights. Concert goers and patrons of the Paramount, taking in the opening night of Legends of the Fall, filled the pathways, and the bustle filled his ears while his gaze swiveled between the 2 marquees opposite each other. Woolworths and Diana restaurant signs and the looming St. John City Market lit up against the dark sky, adding to the magic and novelty of the night. St. John was the big city to an 11-year-old country boy. You certainly are qualified, Liam, said Scott, and I have no reservations about offering you the job. My only regret is that it isn't full-time employment. With this whole pandemic mess, it's a wonder we're still open at all. He got up and walked over to the photograph on the wall. I was here the day they cut the ribbon for the official grand opening in 1994. It's an amazing venue, that's for sure. I came to my first concert here in 1995, Liam said. The only reason this theater exists in its present glory is because of a massive amount of vision and dedication of a few people in this city, Scott continued, pointing to another famed photograph. They gave the Full Gospel Assembly a $1 down payment with the promise of another $999,999 payment in 1 year, and they made good on their promise. Bringing the theater back to its original 1913 grandeur took 11 years. Wow, that's impressive, Liam said. A few minutes later, Liam found himself sitting on a bench in King Square, staring up at the marquee across the street. Tears, like at the concert so long ago, were close to the surface, and if he let it, the emotion would overtake him. He was home, living a ferry crossing away from the house he'd grown up in, and a quick drive from the theater he'd dreamt about working in for such a long time. In 3 days, in 3 days, he would take his place on the team that would bring every act and event to life on the stage of the historic theater. A swoop of pigeons brought him quickly out of his emotional trance. He watched as the birds landed very near his feet and began pecking at the ground and at each other. Turning his head, he scanned the people milling about. There was a mix, teenagers fooling around, the F word punctuating every interaction. A couple of older women, one dragging a suitcase on wheels, and a circle of old men, no doubt tackling all the troubles of the world. Probably most of the people in the mix had things pretty tough, a lot tougher than he did. He had Amanda, a new baby girl, a house to live in, food in his cupboards and a fridge, food in his cupboards and fridge, a beat up VW that was still going strong, and parents who would always help him in any way they could. And now he had a job at the Imperial Theater. She's a beauty, isn't she? It took Liam a second or two to realize the man who just sat down at the other end of the bench was speaking to him, and that he was referring to the theater across the street. Yes, she sure is. They called her the Capitol when I was a kid. I saw some good films there back in the day. Not silent ones, although I probably look that old to you. Every Saturday they had a matinee. Lots of westerns. Roy Rogers was my favorite. Trigger was his horse, right? Now, you're too young to remember that. We had horses next door when I was growing up, and my dad always called one of them Trigger. He grew up in Britain, but apparently they watched Roy Rogers over there too. Growing up here, I never imagined traveling anywhere, but ended up in California. No one's traveling much these days with that damn virus going on. Small world, really, when you think about it. My grandmother came from England, a war bride. Folks are more alike than different, she used to say, and as a kid, I had no clue what that meant. I kind of get it now. Hank kept his eye focused on the marquee, announcing the upcoming Blue Rodeo concert, while the young man's exuberance for the job he'd just landed at the Imperial provided the rest of the conversation. If Hank started talking about training in San Francisco and then recording and mixing the albums of most of the well-known artists in the 60s and 70s, it would just seem like a tall tale coming from a scruffy old man in rags. Listing the bands, artists, and albums he'd had a part in producing would only impress this young fellow if he believed a word of it. Hank stood and steadied himself on the arm of the bench. Have a good day, young fella. Okay, and the fourth character I'm going to introduce you to is Bruce. November 8th, 2021. Bruce Smith rolled the trolley of new garbage cans along the paved walkway of the Loyalist burial ground. In his 43 years working for the city of St. John, he had never seen the amount of vandalism and disregard for public spaces he was now seeing every day. It was taking the fun out of the job. Some might think his job menial and unimportant, but he had always taken pride in keeping the city looking nice. 46 years of doing just that while trying to make a living and provide for his family. For a high school dropout, steady work, a decent wage, benefits, and a pension plan had been nothing to scoff at. With retirement approaching, Bruce should be looking forward to a life of leisure, but with Edna getting half his pension in the divorce settlement, he knew he'd have to find work elsewhere to make ends meet. Okay. Lynette might disappear. Her Wi-Fi's iffy. Oh, we so depend on the Wi-Fi, but I'm going to keep reading. Thank you. Let me see. He was just making rent on his one-bedroom Orange Street apartment as it was. He'd stay working if it were up to him, but management thought a 64-year-old man wasn't up to the physical demands of this job, even though he still carried his weight and worked twice as hard as the younger guys. Good old Smitty, they all called him, and usually he was the guy with all the jokes, good humor, and can-do spirit. Lately, though, it had been hard. It had been hard keeping up that facade. New garbage cans, eh? Bruce turned toward the voice. Even though the man walking toward him had his hood pulled up and tied tightly, Bruce could see the wrinkled, whiskered face and guessed he was probably several years older than himself. A sparkle in the man's deep blue eyes emitted some vulnerability as well as kindness, and Bruce felt no threat. Yes, maybe they'll leave these alone for a bit, Bruce answered. In what world does it make sense to start a barrel fire in a plastic garbage can? Better than having a bonfire in the middle of the bandstand across the street, don't you think? The poor buggers are just trying to keep warm. Well, I guess you're right. Keeps us busy, I'll tell you. Too bad the folks who pay your salary don't see how desperately this city needs more low-income housing. That's true. I'm Bruce, by the way, but most folks call me Smitty. What's your name? Hank. Sorry if I sound pissed off, but it's real hard to find a decent place to live right now. The rooming house I was in for the last 7 years just got bought by some property developer, which put a lot of old guys like me out on the street. They're turning it into high-end apartments, which won't be affordable for the average person. When I was growing up in this city, a person could afford to buy a decent house. Doesn't seem to be that way now, even for those earning a good wage. So what the hell is an old codger like me supposed to do? I hear what you're saying. The wife and I bought one of those wartime houses over north in 1981 for $68,000. We thought that was a lot back then, but I'd just gotten on permanent with the city, and Edna was a nurse. So we managed the mortgage payments and some renovations. The price it sold for last year was unbelievable. You'd think I'd be rolling in dough, but divorce is costly business. Nothing easy about any of it. They throw a damn pandemic into the works. Bruce put the last garbage can in place and started pulling the trolley back toward the truck parked beside the curb. Nice to meet you, Hank. Hope things start looking up for you. Okay, and one more reading about Bruce, page 221. I'm sorry, Lynette had to leave, but this will be recorded and people can read it later, and it's all good. 2021. Okay, December 23rd, 2021. It was page 20, whatever. Okay, I'm fine. Miriam put the, oh no, I'm not starting there. There's something quite magical about this place when the bandstand is lit, Bruce said as he sat down beside Hank. The light snowfall adds to the beauty. Even those gaudy green trees on the lamppost look nice tonight. Is that why you're strolling through King Square at this time of day? Hank asked. Nothing better to do, Bud. To be honest with you, I've walked here every night since we put up the Christmas decorations. Not much else to do with my evenings. Let's walk to Kirsten's flower shop, Bruce suggested. It's lit up real nice. Never took you for a romantic, Hank said. Bruce and Hank walked a block down Charlotte and stopped to admire the display in the shop window. I try to find the beauty in this city wherever I can, Bruce said. But there's lots not so beautiful, like the fact that guys like you can't find a decent place where they can afford to live in. The two men walked along Germain Street, taking in the beauty of the light snow falling on the Christmas lights, trimming the doors and windows of the heritage houses. Where are you living now, Hank? Bruce asked a few minutes later. I know they took your shelter on the causeway down. I suppose they just pitched your mattress along with everything else. Yeah, they sure did, Hank said. I'm staying at a friend's place on this street, actually, and I'm on a waiting list for a rooming house on Princess. Maybe 2022 will be a better year for this old guy. If I last until then, that is. What makes you say that? Are you sick? No, I'm just old and tired. Never thought I'd make it to my 80s. Not many of us do, you know. So many obstacles preventing old age for a gay man. AIDS, of course, wipes so many out, but violence and suicide were other big killers. I've lost friends and lovers to all that, and I'm amazed every day that I'm still here. It's not easy being the last man standing. By this time, they had made their way back to King Square, parking themselves on Hank's bench again. I think that's a wedding party, Bruce said, pointing across the square. Looks like they're posing for pictures on the bandstand. Nice backdrop, if I do say so myself. You didn't string those lights, Bruce. Said you were too old for that foolishness this year. I supervised, Bruce said. I set the standard, too, my friend. I've been around for a lot of Christmas light installations. It's two men, Hank said suddenly, rising to his feet to get a better look. Two handsome young men, hand in hand, on the day of their marriage. God bless them. That makes my heart soar. Okay, that's all my readings. These are just glimpses of four people who interacted and truly saw Hank Lowman in the 2 months he spent homeless. The novel tells Hank's backstory as he struggles to come to terms with his sexual identity, as he follows his dream of becoming a sound engineer, when he suffers a traumatic loss, and when he returns to his hometown in 1986 because of his desire to reconnect with his daughter and get to know his grandson. This is a fictional story about one man and the multiple factors that led to his homelessness. May we all see the human beings behind the increasing number of unhoused people and desperate conditions they are living in. May we support and embrace meaningful solutions in our cities and towns. I applaud the efforts and vision of projects like the 12 Neighbors community in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And anybody looking at this later, when it's been recorded, please Google that 12 Neighbors community in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and see how they are respecting each person that finds themselves homeless and is, through their project, able to find a safe place to live. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. And since we're such a small crowd, I don't expect that there'll be a lot of questions, but I appreciate what Judith did, what Tracy did to organize this. And I always appreciate Ida. And maybe if Ruth and Richard are at your house, maybe they're there too. Anyway, thanks. Thanks, Judith. Oh, and you're muted. Still.
Ida, if you wanted to ask any questions, you can ask to unmute yourself, or you can write a message in the chat and I can ask your question. But so Susan, I had a question.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
So you mentioned the group that does work with the homeless people. That's good.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you do any research with them? Have you worked with them?
Well, coincidentally, the manuscript that I just finished is about houses that were built in 1947 when they had such a homeless problem with returning servicemen. And I brought it up to 2023 and had a grandson of one of the main characters that was instrumental in building those 1947 houses. I had him working at the 12 Neighbors community project in Fredericton. So I did a lot of research then. And probably when I was writing Such Winter's Day, I probably just started to hear about it. And but I've done lots of research since, and it's very worth looking at, because this is a man who used a lot of his own money before he got any funding from anybody, and started out with a small amount of homes, and I think there's up to 100 homes in this 12 Neighbors community.
That's awesome. I'm just trying to.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Ida. You won't turn on. You won't turn on your video because you don't.
It won't turn on. It says
Yeah.
the
it
host
won't turn on.
The host won't let me turn it on.
Not because you don't look as beautiful as you normally do.
I'm trying to. It's because we had that.
Disabled.
We had that
Okay.
Zoom bomber.
Right.
So
He's the same fella. He's stalking you, Susan.
Oh, was he,
It was
did
the
he come
same
on
sound
before?
from last time, I thought.
What's
Yes, it
that?
looks like.
It was,
I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, there's so much hacking and foolishness going on. You wonder, but I mean, the internet provides so many good things as well. We have to put up with the nasty ones, I guess.
Yeah. Yep.
So, Susan, I heard the backstory about why you wrote this book. I was there before it was done, and you
Yeah,
had been walking and you saw the bandstand and you pictured some person there, so you brought it to life. So good for you.
thank you.
Did you want to tell everyone of that experience?
Um, the experience of running away from home. um,
Well,
no, I think basically, I think what spoke to me, even though I didn't really see a man on the bench, was how judgmental we can be when we see somebody that's, down on their luck or, whatever, and how afraid we are. And, in some cases, there's some fear is justified, but in so many cases, well, in all cases, I believe there's a human being behind that person and factors that have led to the situation that they find themselves in. I said in my beginning, in my introduction, I'm not sure if you were here for that or not, Ida, about meeting the man that I dedicated the book to, about meeting his mother a few weeks ago. And that was so impactful to me because this is a boy, a young man. He was a man, the same size. I don't know about size, the same age as the son that we lost would be if he were still living, and struggling with addiction, which is often the case. And they'd been separated from each other because of all the problems of addiction. He was a kind, wonderful, gentle soul, and he didn't bother anyone. He had his own encampment that was separate from the place where he actually died because he was visiting people in the tent when the fire started. But I mean, you know, just an example of what I'm saying about everybody has a backstory. Everyone,
yeah.
carries their own whatever. And it's just such a terrible, terrible problem, in all our cities and everywhere across the world. And, we have to look after each other, but we don't sometimes. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question or what you're
No, it
asking for,
did.
but
And
so
Richard and
much more.
Ruth, they're not here yet, so they won't be here till Monday.
Oh, I thought they were there. Okay.
No, they're
Yeah.
coming on Monday.
Yeah. And I mean, you know yourself about writing about, tough stuff, and you do it in an amazing way as well. And I'm very proud to call you my friend, and you always show up. I don't show up for you as regularly, so I really thank you. Anyway, yeah. Another question from my
Are you
large
working
audience?
on something new now?
Well, I just finished one, and I'm just taking a bit of a break, and but I have two others started, and one that I think probably I'll return to when I muster up the energy.
Well, you're supposed to let me catch up. I won't be able to catch up like that.
Well, you're doing a damn fine job. And did you put my book in the mail that you were sending me?
Yes, it's
Yes.
in
Well,
the
I
mail.
look forward to getting that because you're at number what?
11 now. It'll
11.
be 11. It'll be 11 in the next
Well, if
month.
I stop at 14 and wait and let you catch up, I think we're okay. All good. Let's just do what we do. Anyway. All right. Well, I haven't had any supper yet, so I'm anxious to.
So hang up and shut up, say.
You know how I like to eat, Ida. You know how I like to eat. So.
All right. It was
Anyway,
great. It was great to see you, and it was nice to listen to you.
thank you. And I'll talk to you soon.